So UFC Fight Night Dawson versus Green is the next UFC card coming up, but it's not going to be at this weekend that I'm recording this video. It's going to be the weekend after. So we've got a lot of extra time to analyze this card, as well as the cards that follow it, which includes that massive UFC 294 card, which I cannot wait for. But let's talk about this one. It's a good Apex card. It should be a pretty good card to come back to after a little bit of a break. And I am going to give my early predictions to every single fight on the card. And I probably will go over the card again if something major does happen, like maybe a couple of fights fall through and we get short notice replacements. I'll probably will go through the card once more. But let's get into things. And before we do get into that, though, you do have my 3-day free trial to the UFC Picks premium membership service. And also, you've got my 125% sign up bonus to BetUS right there. Kicking off the card, you got Montana De La Rosa taking on JJ Aldrich. This fight is going to be at 125 pounds. And I am going to be picking Montana De La Rosa in this matchup. Now, JJ Aldrich has taken this fight on short notice. She's coming off that finish win over Yang. But the problem is, I didn't actually think that JJ Aldrich looked that impressive in that fight, despite getting the finish. And yes, I know Yang did kind of get beaten up quite a bit, especially in that second round. But I thought Yang had way too much success in that matchup for what I was kind of expecting. I think Aldrich was like a minus 600 favorite in that fight, just for a bit of perspective. And Montana De La Rosa is a really good wrestler. Now, she does have a pretty spotty record, but if you do look into it, she has fought some really, really good fighters. She last fought Tatiana Suarez, and she lost that fight recently, but before that, it was Macy Barber, who's now gone on to do pretty big things in the flyweight division. She beat Lipsky. She went to a draw with Mayra Bueno Silva, and then also Viviane Araujo beat her, and she is also in the top 15. So all of Montana De La Rosa's losses aren't to bad fighters whatsoever. If you look at the odds, De La Rosa is actually the underdog, but she is the one that has had the full camp in this matchup, and I do think that De La Rosa can get it done. JJ Aldrich is pretty well-rounded. She doesn't really have much finishing ability whatsoever, despite getting the finish in her last fight. Montana De La Rosa isn't the most of a finisher herself, but I do believe that we should be able to see De La Rosa go out there and out-wrestle JJ Aldrich and win a 3-round decision. So that is my pick. I'm going with De La Rosa. I think she can win a decision over Aldrich in this matchup. Now we've got Karolina Kowalkiewicz taking on Diana Belbita. I am actually going to go with Karolina Kowalkiewicz. I really didn't think I was going to do this, but the more that I think about it, I do like her in this matchup, because at the end of the day, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, she is still more technical than Diana Belbita. I really do like Diana Belbita for obvious reasons, but I think at this point, like, Karolina Kowalkiewicz, she went on this massive losing streak to pretty good fighters. Now, all of a sudden, she's on a bit of a win streak, and I do think that momentum can continue over until she starts fighting girls that are genuinely in the top 15. I think that Karolina Kowalkiewicz can keep this fight on the feet and outstrike Diana Belbita from range. Now, yes, she has had pretty close fights. Their fight against Vanessa Demopoulos, she did beat her up pretty easily, though. That Silvana Gomez-Suarez fight was very close. Her fight against Felice Herrig, she got that submission, but Herrig was on a massive losing streak herself. Diana Belbita is coming off that win over Maria Oliveira, which is a pretty good win. But before that, she lost to Gloria DePaula. It's just a bunch of red flags out there for me. I'm going to go with the more technical fighter, and that is Karolina Kowalkiewicz. And Karolina Kowalkiewicz, if you look at the odds, is almost minus 200 on Bet Online. Okay, they're a little bit wide for me. I mean, I wouldn't bet on women's MMA, but I think this goes over 2.5 rounds if you want something there. Give me Kowalkiewicz to win. I'm surprised with how many people are picking her on Tapology, though. That is pretty crazy to me. And now we get into the fun ones. We get into the fun fights. I cannot use my mouse. This is embarrassing. Nate Maness taking on Mateus Mendonca. Please note, this fight is at men's 125 pounds. So Mateus Mendonca is moving down a weight class to 125. And Nate Maness is committing to this absolutely ridiculous weight cut that he's trying to do to make 125. But the problem with Nate Maness, for me, is I much rather him at 135. Like, yes, I do understand that Nate Maness could be absolutely massive for this weight class and could potentially go on a run, because he is a really, really good fighter. But in my opinion, I think Nate Maness is better off at 135. We didn't really get to see much of a sample whatsoever when he took on Sergey Ulanbekov, because he submitted him in 2 minutes. But, like before that, he lost to Umar Nurmagomedov, and Umar Nurmagomedov is a pretty good fighter, right? And he beat Tony Gravely. Gravely's beating a lot of good guys right now. Like, Nate Maness, he was on a good run at one point in the UFC, and I think coming down to 125 isn't the answer. It's like he lost to Umar and was like, man, I'm just not big enough for the weight class or something like that. I don't really know why he's at 125. I think he's going to be a little bit slower at 125. And you don't want to be slow against someone that trains at shoot to box, because Mateus Mendonca is one of those Charles Oliveira clones. He's like a Philipe dos Santos. He's like a Daniel Santos, an Alves Brenner. A guy that is going to bomb forward with his aggressive Muay Thai and his very aggressive wrestling and grappling. That's what Mendonca is. Very, very powerful on the feet, but he can also really get it done on the ground as well. And I just see him overwhelming at Nate Maness in this matchup. And I think that we might actually see a finish out of Mendonca. Nate Maness is a really, really good fighter, don't get me wrong. But I just don't see it at 125, man. I feel like if Nate Maness, I feel like what he really easily could have done is lost to Umar Nurmagomedov and just told the UFC, hey, I literally just fought Umar Nurmagomedov. Can you do me a favor and give me a favorable matchup next at 135? And he could have come back from there, but I don't know. I'm going to go with Mendonca. I'm going to go with Mendonca by finish. I thought Mendonca actually had a pretty good display of himself against Javid Basharat as well. Yes, he did lose that fight, but I thought he looked pretty good. He looked good in the first round. After that, it was a bit of Basharat taking over, but he still had a pretty good display. The odds for this one, I think, are pretty wide as well. Like, Mendonca's minus 260. My confidence in Mendonca are not minus 260 odds. Nate Maness at plus 200 isn't so bad, but I'm gonna have to go with Mendonca in this matchup here. And now we can move on to Chris Guitierrez, take it on Montel Jackson. And it pains me so much, man, to say this. I wanted to pick Pedro Munoz so bad, and this happens all the time. I have like a feeling, I say I've got a feeling in my balls that Pedro Munoz is gonna win, and I didn't pick Pedro Munoz. Like, what was I thinking? In hindsight, it was also obvious, right? Chris Guitierrez went out there against Pedro Munoz and got really totally outclassed. And I thought that Chris Guitierrez could have lost to Munoz, man, because he hasn't really fought anyone that good. Like, he beat Frankie Edgar, like, who hasn't at this point. Dana Buckley, like, kind of fighting at the bottom of 135, like the very bottom of 135. Philipe Colares, I mean, rest in peace to Philipe Colares. I won't say anything about him, but I mean, Andre Ewell's not in the UFC anymore. Like, in hindsight, it was also obvious, Chris Guitierrez wasn't fighting the best guys, and Montel Jackson has been deserving of this ranked opportunity for a while. This guy, by I believe his last 4 wins, he's knocked down his opponent every single time. He knocked out Rani Yaya, it's like a minus 800 favorite. He knocks down Julio Arce in a decision win. He knocks down JP Bates like 4 times, absolutely destroyed him in that matchup. I think we see Montel Jackson go out there and knock out Chris Guitierrez, man. I just can't believe that I picked him. I cannot believe I picked Chris Guitierrez in his last fight. Hindsight's always 20/20, but it's so frustrating because I knew it in myself that he was going to lose, and I didn't pick him anyway. I got caught up in the hype. Think Jackson's going to KO him. I don't think Guitierrez is that top 10 guy that everyone thought he was and that I got sucked into the hype for. I think Montel Jackson is a guy with pretty good potential. Absolutely massive hands. He's got the biggest hands in the UFC, I believe, despite being a bantamweight. Absolutely crazy power in his hands. I think he can go out there and KO Guitierrez. I think you can see what Pedro Munoz was able to do, really pressure him, push him backwards, and Guitierrez had absolutely nothing for him. Jackson's wrestling's also pretty good as well if he needs to go to that. So give me Montel Jackson to win this matchup, and we're going to have to open up FightOdds.io because I closed it before, and the odds for this matchup are minus 175 Montel Jackson, plus 150 Chris Guitierrez. I think that's relatively reasonable. The odds for this matchup, though, they are a pick'em, and that kind of does describe how I feel about this matchup. It's like minus 110 either way. On some sports books, Aoriqileng is the favorite. On some sports books, Johnny Munoz Jr. is the favorite. I feel that this is one of those fights that's going to flip-flop, and you're just going to have to kind of go with who you think's going to be able to kind of push their game. Because Aoriqileng, I would say for the most part, is a striker, and we all kind of know what Johnny Munoz Jr. is. He is a grappler. He's kind of a pure grappler. Like, I don't rate Johnny Munoz Jr. too highly, personally. I don't think he's very good on the feet. I think he's got a questionable chin. But he's really, really good at grappling. He's not the best at wrestling, but he's really, really good at grappling. If he does get Aoriqileng down to the ground, he absolutely could have a very significant amount of success in this matchup. And very well could go out there and finish Aoriqileng by submission. But I think as long as the fight is on the feet, I think it's going to be Aoriqileng all day. Now, Aoriqileng is not the most... He's not the most technical guy in the world. He's definitely not really the best fighter in the world. But one thing I'm going to say about Aoriqileng, this guy is never in a boring fight, man. I know he got KO'd by Arman Zahabi in a minute. That was unfortunate. But his fight against Jay Perrin was pretty fun. He knocked out Cameron Else in about 3 minutes, but his fights against Cody Durden and Jeff Molina were both competitive and fun scraps. You know, he hasn't really beaten the best guys on the regional scene, and he hasn't really beaten the best guys in the UFC, but he always comes to fight, man. I think that's what he's going to do. If Aoriqileng can keep this fight on the feet, and I think he can, he should be able to beat Johnny Munoz Jr. Like, this is just one of those things where I just don't rate Johnny Munoz Jr. that highly. I think he's got absolutely fantastic grappling, but I think aside from that grappling, there's just not really a lot there. And I know that Aoriqileng got KO'd in his last matchup, so maybe that could play something on his mind, and he could make a big slip up on the feet, and Johnny Munoz could go and catch him. But Munoz had a pretty bad performance against Daniel Santos. That was a really bad stylistic matchup for him, though, to be fair. He beat Ludovic Shalinian. I didn't think that was an impressive performance whatsoever. I've got Aoriqileng. I'm picking Aoriqileng to win this matchup. I actually am going to go with Aoriqileng by KO. He's moved up to 135 pounds. He's looked a lot better since moving up to 135 pounds. I think Johnny Munoz Jr.'s striking is just not good enough for 135. And he got KO'd just by looking at Tony Gravely. I mean, that uppercut, there wasn't a lot of power behind that, and he's got out. So I think Aoriqileng can touch that chin and knock him out. To be fair, Daniel Santos couldn't knock him out, so maybe there's something to that. But I'm going to go with Aoriqileng by KO in this matchup. Then we've got Kanako Murata taking on Vanessa Demopoulos. I've got to go with Kanako Murata here. The problem is she hasn't fought for a long time. The last time she fought was 2 years ago, and she did lose to shoulder injury. But the thing is, if you look at her record, you know, Randa Marcos isn't the best winner in the world, but some people did struggle to her. But her win over Emily Ducote, really good win. Emily Ducote is now in the UFC, and she was ranked at one point in the UFC as well. And she did beat a couple of decent fighters on the regional scene as well. The loss to Verna Jandiroba. It's unfortunate that it happened, but she's taken on Vanessa Demopoulos. This is a big step down in competition. And I've been pretty public in my feelings about Vanessa Demopoulos. I don't think she's that good, and I don't know why the UFC went on this absolutely gigantic PR push trying to get behind Vanessa Demopoulos and make her this next big thing, because I don't see what they were seeing. I'll tell you that much. But I think on this matchup, I mean, I think Kanako Murata, she's a good wrestler, and I think she can go out there and out-wrestle Vanessa Demopoulos. The thing about Vanessa Demopoulos is she is a pretty good grappler, but on the feet, she oh, okay, I've gotta be careful. She is probably the worst striker in the UFC, potentially. I mean, I know there's a lot of worse ones out there, but Vanessa Demopoulos loves to punch air. She loves to punch air. Now, Kanako Murata, her striking isn't that great either, to be fair. But I think that she should be able to install her game on Demopoulos and get those takedowns and take her down. Avoid, I mean, any big shots that Vanessa Demopoulos is going to try and throw at her. She's going to have to avoid submissions, but I think at this point, Murata probably is talented enough to avoid stuff like that. I'm going to go with Kanako Murata. I think that she can win this matchup. She's minus 300. Do not bet on this fight whatsoever at minus 300. That does not make sense. I know I just didn't say a lot of nice things about Demopoulos, but Murata hasn't fought for 2 years. Honestly, anything could surprise me, but we'll move on to Alex Morono taking on Joaquin Buckley. You've kind of got to go with Buckley by KO here, and I am going to pick Joaquin Buckley by KO, but I do like Alex Morono. Alex Morono kind of is one of those underappreciated guys in the UFC in general, because he is someone that you can trust is going to show up on short notice anytime, anywhere. He took on Donald Cerrone on very, very short notice. I know it was Donald Cerrone. Where was this? It must have been more than 2 years ago. Anyway, he fought Donald Cerrone on like less than a few days' notice. And there it is, 2020. I was going to say, hold on, this did happen, right? And he did do that. And then he took on a bunch of other guys on short notice. He took on Santiago Ponzinibbio on like a week's notice as well. And he did get KO'd in this matchup. And that kind of is what it comes down to with Alex Morono. Morono's a very talented fighter. He's a very good grappler. But he doesn't really use that grappling as much as you'd want him to. And the problem is when he's on the feet, he gets hit way too much. And you can't get hit by someone that does have the power of Joaquin Buckley. Yes, I know that his win in the UFC at 170 pounds is over Andre Fialho, but, you know, and Fialho doesn't have the best chin, but it's still a KO win. And before that, he was losing at 185 to guys that are pretty good 185ers, like ranked fighters here. I can see Joaquin Buckley coming out here and knocking out Alex Morono. I think Alex Morono really could come in with a potential game plan of wrestling, of grappling. But when the fight's on the feet, man, I just think Alex Morono gets hit way too much. And I don't think on the feet either, Alex Morono really possesses that sort of power that's going to make Joaquin Buckley get his respect and kind of stop Joaquin Buckley from trying to come forward, from trying to throw bombs that may expose him a little bit for a couple of shots coming back. I've got to go with Buckley here. I think coming down to 170 actually is a good move. I was a little bit skeptical at first, but in hindsight, he was really small for 185. Like, really small for 185. So I think him at 170 makes sense. I'm going to go Buckley. I'm going to go Buckley by KO. And if you do look at the odds, Joaquin Buckley is minus 190 and Alex Morono is plus 165. And then we've got Philipe Lins versus Ion Cutelaba. I mean, it's an Ion Cutelaba fight, so it's a coin flip. It really is. I mean, I got sucked into the Tanner Boser hype, and I picked Tanner Boser to beat him. I mean, it was mainly because we saw Ion Cutelaba on a massive losing streak, but that was a bad call. I know, that was embarrassing, but Ion Cutelaba, that's kind of what he does. He either wins in the first round, or he gasses out and somehow wins a decision, or he loses. It's kind of weird like that. Like, Ion Cutelaba is such an odd fighter, but he's so dangerous in the first round. And the thing about Philipe Lins is, they're kind of the same thing. He's dangerous in the first round, but his cardio is a big question. There's so many questions just in general about Philipe Lins. He's such a very odd fighter to understand. Like, he just beat Maxime Grecian, which is a pretty good win. He KO'd OSP. He didn't look that good, I mean, when he came over to the UFC originally. Like Philipe Lins is a fighter that is so hard to understand. I mean, and so is Ion Cutelaba. Ion Cutelaba, very dangerous in round one. He kind of has a wrestling base, but he bombs away at round one and has a lot of power. And then after round one, Ion Cutelaba, he slows down quite a bit, quite significantly. But the thing is, Philipe Lins also slows down significantly after round one as well. It's just going to be an odd fight. If it leaves the first round, I mean, anything could happen. I'm going to go with Ion Cutelaba. I am flipping the coin. I'm going to go Cutelaba, minus 140, first round finish. Philipe Lins is plus 115. On this Pinnacle Sportsbook, this is Ion Cutelaba's odds here is plus 105. So maybe this is one of those fights which is also going to flip-flop in the odds. Maybe you pick him sort of closer, potentially. But I've got to go with Cutelaba. I'm going to go with Cutelaba, round one finish. And now we can move on to Bill Algeo taking on Alexander Hernandez. I'm picking Algeo because I can trust the fact that he can go 3 rounds. Alexander Hernandez, my goodness, man, this guy's cardio scares me so much. And his cardio at 145 is a really big problem. And that is why he has been struggling in fights. He took on Jim Miller. That was a really close fight. And I remember when that fight happened, people actually thought that Jim Miller could have won that matchup. And against Billy Q, he lost that fight by finish. Here's Hinata Moicano. He lost that fight by finish as well. But the problem is, he gasses so bad, especially when he's fighting at 145. He's a former lightweight that come up and was quite exciting. But now that he's at 145, he's just not the same fighter after the first round whatsoever. And I think that we can see Bill Algeo kind of survive that first round that Alexander Hernandez is going to try and put on him. And then from there, Algeo can kind of initiate his game plan, kind of fight from the range, trying to get the takedowns, trying to out-grapple Alexander Hernandez, who probably is going to be completely gassed out in the third round. I'm going to go with Algeo. I'm going to go with Algeo by decision. The real main reason why I'm picking Algeo in this fight truly is because he does just have significantly better cardio than Hernandez. So yeah, give me Algeo to win this matchup. Give me him to win by decision. I think he can take over towards the end of the fight as Hernandez completely slows down. The odds for this one at the moment are minus 128 for Algeo, plus 108 for Hernandez, so very close on the odds, but I like Algeo to be able to withstand the the first round. Now we've got Drew Dober taking on Aoriqileng. I mean, I feel like this has got to be a confident Drew Dober pick, right? The problem about Drew Dober though is it's the same thing about the Matt Frivola fight. Is Drew Dober gonna be that motivated to fight Aoriqileng? I mean, I don't know. I mean, he didn't look that motivated when he took on Matt Frivola. He got KO'd. And Drew Dober's never really been KO'd like that whatsoever. But the thing about Aoriqileng is, man, he looked like a shell of himself against Christos Giagos. And I'm not too sure why Aoriqileng has decided to take on this fight. Because Drew Dober is a borderline top 15 guy at 155 pounds. He beat Bobby Green by KO. He beat Rafael Alves. He beat Terrence McKinney. You see what I mean? Like, these guys are guys that Dober is motivated to fight, and he's not motivated whatsoever to fight Matt Frivola. He might not be motivated to fight Aoriqileng, but the thing about Aoriqileng is he looked so bad against Giagos. I mean, you've got to go Dober. I think Dober KOs him in round number 1. Drew Dober's minus 400. I'm pretty confident he gets the fight finished by KO in the first round, honestly. I mean, Aoriqileng just looked like an absolute shell of himself in his last fight, and that's what I'm going to go off. Yes, Dober left himself open. Yes, he got KO'd by Matt Frivola, but we're going to find out how good Matt Frivola really is. I mean, if Matt Frivola can beat Benoit Saint Denis, I mean, then that's not a bad loss whatsoever. But we'll see. We'll see how Dober responds. I mean, everyone on Tapology is picking him. It'll be interesting to see if he can break the curse of how motivated he is in sort of the matchups. Now we've got Joe Pyfer taking on Abdul Razak Alhassan. I mean, it's another fight for Pyfer, really, at the end of the day. I think that Pyfer comes out here, gets a good win. The UFC's being pretty smart and strategic in the way that they're building him up, but they're actually giving him pretty tough fights. Like, the thing is, Gerald Meerschaert is not an easy fight for anybody on the 185-pound roster. I think Gerald Meerschaert would give, like, most of the roster a pretty good fight, you know, like he gave Andrei Petroski kind of all he could handle, and GM3's been in there with some really top guys. I think GM3 is kind of one of those guys which most people, if they can get past the legendary GM3, they struggle to do it. Joe Pyfer ran right through him. Joe Pyfer knocked out Alan Amedovski in the first round, but let's be real, maybe that was the second round. Let's be real though, that was a set-up fight for Pyfer to get a good win in the UFC, to really get it started. That was in the first round, it was. He's the guy that fought on that really bad Contender Series card last year, and Dana White did the big B pipe. You guys know the speech at this point, really. Abdul like Alhassan, he's dangerous. He's got that judo base. He doesn't really use it. He just kind of prefers to strike. I think it's going to be interesting. Like, Pyfer is obviously going to have to avoid big shots coming back at him from Abdul Razak Alhassan, but I think Pyfer can withstand those shots. I think Pyfer can avoid those shots, and I think we get another Joe Pyfer KO in this matchup here. I mean, Abdul Razak Alhassan beat Claudio Ribeiro, but he was getting hit a lot by Claudio Ribeiro in that matchup before he got the KO. He had a close fight with Buckley. I mean, I think it's just it's a setup fight for Pyfer. I mean, the odds reflect it. Pyfer's minus 350. Abdul Razak Alhassan is plus 280, plus 285-ish. That's kind of how I feel about this fight. I'm pretty confident Pyfer gets it done. And then we move on to the main event. You've got Grant Dawson minus 365. Bobby Green plus 290. Once again, I am pretty confident Grant Dawson gets this one done. This is an absolute nightmare matchup for Bobby Green, and it's kind of like the perfect matchup for Grant Dawson at the end of the day, really. Like, yes, Grant Dawson had that draw against Aoriqileng, who I just was talking about before. I mean, that was a bad performance, but since then, he's bounced back, and he had that really big, in my opinion, his coming out party fight, the fight which really put him on the map, was his fight against Mark Madsen, because he took on Mark Madsen on short notice. Now, yes, I do believe like most people picked him to beat Mark Madsen, because it was a pretty good matchup for him stylistically. Yeah, it's minus 210 in that fight, yeah, so... Bro, why did 41% of people... That's the surprise to me of the video. Why did 41% of people pick Madsen? Okay, whatever. Anyway, that was a really good stylistic matchup for Grant Dawson, because Madsen was a Greco-Roman wrestler, and Dawson's more of a traditional American wrestler. Anyway, that was... Whoa, that threw me off. I thought it was going to be like 85% people. Jesus Christ, okay. Okay, and then he beat Damir Ismagulov. Now, in hindsight, pretty good stylistic matchup for him, but I did think that Damir was going to be able to defend the takedowns and keep the fight on the feet, because that's the thing about Dawson. He's not a very good striker, but he's a really good wrestler, and that's kind of what he's going to need to beat Bobby Green. I think Bobby Green can get taken down. I understand that his wrestling and his grappling is quite underrated, but at the end of the day, Green's coming off that win over Tony Ferguson, which Tony Ferguson was doing really well until Green poked him in the eye. And then the thing is as well, before that, Jared Gordon was doing really well until Green clashed heads with him. But that's the thing about Bobby Green I've kind of noticed recently. He's a veteran. He does these veteran things. He does these fouls. I don't know, man. I mean, I think maybe you could see Grant Dawson having success, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Bobby Green comes through with the clash of heads or something. You never know. So I'm going to go Grant Dawson. It's a pretty good matchup for him. He should be able to finish Green as well. I mean, this is the perfect stylistic matchup for Grant Dawson to kind of create a name for himself and then call out someone like, I mean, maybe like call out someone like Dan Hooker, maybe Arman Sarukian, maybe Mateus Gamrod. I know they train together. Thanks for that 138 MMA, but I thought that would be a good matchup. Anyway, yeah, Grant Dawson. I think Grant Dawson wins this matchup. Pretty confident in it. Very interested to see where he can go from here. I think that after this, he's going to have to get like the Dan Hooker fight. Maybe Jalen Turner would want to fight him just to kind of get one back on a wrestler since he lost to Gamrot. Who knows? But it would be interesting to see what happens in the future. This should be a pretty good card. I'm looking forward to it. I do love the UFC. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one.